Happy Halloween, everyone! Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I know I said I was going to be doing the monthly wrap-ups monthly, but then September was a really bad month for me. I think I attempted to read like 5 or 6 books, and I only completed like 2 of them. So I thought I would just smash it up with October, but then October was a really good month for me, and I experienced, or at least attempted to read a lot of books. I decided to cut a few of them, either because I DNF'd them way too early in the book to have any thoughts on them, or if I completed them, they were just fine. Some of these also might sound familiar because I've done a lot of short form videos on them. I am still tackling my TBR, so a lot of these books are just physical books that I've had sitting on my floor in a pile for months that I am attempting to read before I move. But now, as we get closer to our official move-in date, I'm starting to panic. Without further ado, I'm going to explain to you all of the books that I read in September and October. We're going to start with Gingerbread, which is a DNF. Gingerbread is a middle grade book about a 16-year-old punk counterculture girl who is going against the grain and going against her family. For me, it was just a bit too young. The main character is 16, but she talks like she's 12, which I guess is okay if you are a 12-year-old reading the book. But for me, because it was so stream of consciousness and she just was very spoiled and annoying, I didn't want to sit through that. I actually really like the concept of privileged, spoiled, rich girl realizes that her family is bullshit and, you know, is counterculture, goes against what her family tells her to. It's done really well in things like We Were Liars and The Ghost of Ashbury High. This book just didn't really hit the sweet spot on that concept for me, and it just kind of felt like a spoiled girl thinking that her rich family is bullshit for no reason. They haven't actually given her a reason other than they give her a bedtime. Another thing about this book is that it is an American book written by an American author set in like San Francisco, and at some point she's supposed to go to New York as well. So it's like all American, but I don't know what about it specifically made it feel very British to me. It's not British. I don't know what British slang is. It just felt very, if you've ever watched the show like Misfits, like that kind of British, mid-2000s British culture. And it's not a British author. It's not a British character. But that just really impacted the reading experience for me. Then we had The Invention of Sound by Chuck Palahniuk. This is actually the same guy who wrote Fight Club, the book that the movie is based off of. So that was really interesting to find out. I found this in a Dollar Tree. This is a Dollar Tree book review. I found this in a Dollar Tree. Did not know who it was. The reason I picked it up is it's a horror thriller novella. It's kind of on the edge between a novella and a short novel, but it's about a Foley artist. If you're not aware what Foley artists do, they go in and dub over sound effects in movies. And obviously, like animated movies, they have to do all of the sound effects, but even in live action movies, they're dubbing over sounds of like heels clacking on the cement, or like the impossible sounds like somebody's head getting crushed by a rock or something. Like, obviously you can't replicate that sound on set, but even the more mundane sounds, the reason they go over and dub them is because the microphones are more focused on picking up the voices, that they're not catching the like crisp sounds of high heels. So these Foley artists, they're so cool. Watch videos about them. This book is about 2 individuals. The first is a guy who, like 15 years ago, lost his daughter. She was kidnapped. He is still looking out for her. The case has gone cold, but he is still like on the dark web looking at horrible child videos, if you get my drift, trying to find her or find anyone who could be related to her kidnapping. The second person is a Foley artist who works in Hollywood, and she specializes specifically in screams, and her methods are pretty unorthodox. And these 2 characters just kind of collide together on this epic adventure. I read this in one sitting. That's not normal for me. Unless the book is like under 100 pages, I don't usually read it in one sitting, but this was just a fun, intense read. The writing style was super unique, which makes me want to read the rest of his work, especially Fight Club. At the end, it did lose me a little bit just because it zooms out side of the main characters and like their stories, and kind of looks at this bigger picture of the people who are like pulling at strings and stuff, the big Hollywood undercity and whatnot. I don't care about that. That really lost me. I wish it had just stayed focused on the two main characters, so that's why I didn't really enjoy the last little bit of it. The rest of the book was great. The next book is Watched by Marina Budhos. This is very similar to The Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Boulley. My biggest critique of The Firekeeper's Daughter is that there was too much going on for anything to really shine through, and I just wish that the mystery aspect of the book had been streamlined. Watched is a similar concept, but kind of as if it had been streamlined. Watched is also about a teenager in an ethnic community. So in this case, it is the Muslim communities of New York, or at least one specific part of New York. He gets himself into some trouble, and the cops cut a deal with him, basically saying, we want you to kind of keep an eye on the community. You can tell the difference between like a really religious person, like a very conservative religious person, versus somebody who's going down the extremist pipeline. You know, just keep an eye out, and if you start hearing these kind of buzzwords, let us know. And so this guy has to grapple with this idea that he is the spy in his community. You know, this ethical conundrum that he might potentially be turning in a family member or a friend because they said the wrong thing in his vicinity. It's a fine little read, very quick and easy. It just never really got emotional for me. It never really had the high stakes, mainly because nothing actually happens. It's more of a literary read where through this project that he's doing for the police, he gets closer with his community. I don't know, nothing really about it felt emotional, and never really had that emotional gut punch that I was looking for. After Watched, I hit a really bad reading slump and I could not finish anything. I couldn't focus on a book. I got to the very, very end of September and I listened to an audiobook called The Accidental Highwayman by Ben Tripp. It was like the perfect little palate cleanser for me. I loved everything about it. The Accidental Highwayman stars, I think his name is Kit Bristol, and he is the manservant of this like low-level lord. Like, he's got a gambling problem, he doesn't really have a lot of money, but he's always been nice to Kit. And Kit at some point finds his master, on the floor of their house, like bleeding out, and he's dressed as a highwayman. For those dumb Americans, a highwayman is just like a robber, but like on the highway. He's dressed as like the famous highwayman Whistling Jack. Kit is like, you've always been a good guy to me, you know, I want to help you in your hour of need. And the guy's like, if you help me and you, don these clothes and take up the name Whistling Jack, you are going to be magically bound to this errand that I have to do. And I don't want you to do that. And Kit's like, no, I'm going to help you. So he does that. And now he's magically bound to complete this errand that the guy has to do. And that errand is to save a fairy princess from her arranged marriage to the Prince of England at the time. Also, I just remembered I have coffee. Oh, I decided to Irish up this coffee and put rum in it. I don't think rum is Irish, actually. I think it's supposed to be whiskey. Oh, that was a bad idea. I put a lot of rum, and it's bad rum. Oh, it burns. I love this book. It was a great little palate cleanser. It had those great, like, fairy tale tropes that I'm always going to fall for. For example, she's a fairy princess, fairy royalty. Obviously, the little lowly mortal man is going to fall for her. Oh my god, it was so cute. Because it's a wonderful little book. I highly recommend you read it. But it ends on a cliffhanger. I went to look up the second book. The second book has a title. It has like a title and even a cover design, but it's not released yet. And I think it's just been trunked. Like, whatever happened with the publishing, like, it just got canceled. It's been 10 years and the sequel has not been released. And I don't know if Ben Tripp is ever going to see this video, but I swear to God, if you do not finish this series, I mean, it literally ended on a cliffhanger. How dare you? And then not publish the second book. I don't know what happened between you and your publisher, but you know you can self-publish. You know you don't have to. I don't actually know. There might be legal reasons why he can't. But anyway. Okay, so now we get to October, and we'll start out with Chasing the Falconers. This was another middle grade book from my little TBR jar. Chasing the Falconers is about a brother-sister duo named Aiden and Meg, and they are in a penitentiary, but it's not because they did anything wrong. So their parents were helping a guy who said he was part of the CIA, and they gave him very secretive information. But then it came out that that information ended up in the hands of terrorists. They were put on trial for colluding with terrorists. And because the children were, their faces and names were put out onto the public media, and they are now the children of terrorists, they were given new identities and put into a penitentiary for their own safekeeping. They're very worried about their parents who are in federal prisons now, and they need to prove their parents' innocence. So they break out of the penitentiary and they start their journey trying to find the people who will vouch for their parents and give them the information to prove their innocence. This is the first book of a series, and it was a fun read. The only thing is, the main characters were kind of bland, and they team up at some point with another kid from the same penitentiary named Miguel, and Miguel was the best part of the book. Like hands down, he had the better personality, the better backstory. He was just the most fun part of this book. And I looked it up. He's not in the rest of the series. They don't meet up with him again, which really sucked. Now we're going to talk about The Furies by Katie Lowe. I was actually drafting a rant/discussion video based around The Furies and 2 other books and this trend I've been seeing. I eventually decided that I was not ready to make that video. I feel like there is a level of nuance that I, in my anger, was not able to describe. So I'm going to do an abridged version here on what made me DNF The Furies. These are just some thoughts that I've had, not just about The Furies, but a lot of books that I've seen this trend with. Of course, there is a level of nuance, and I'm going to talk about another book that I feel like kind of contradicts this rant. The Furies itself is a book about witches. A murder happened, or some mysterious deaths have happened, and at this prestigious boarding school, a group of girls who are part of this secret club, and the club discusses the history of magic and art and women in history that may or may not have been witches. And at first it's just a fun thought experiment. I didn't get far enough into the book to actually see any of the magic happen, but it's supposed to be like this feminine rage book, like feminist revenge book, toxic femininity, witches, magic. I actually really enjoyed the first part of this book. And there is a world in which I do finish this book. That is not this world. I think some of my reading experience was impacted by the fact that I had read 2 other books that had this trend of essay. I'm going to be talking about rape scenes, so if you're not into that and you don't want to listen to that, you can skip ahead. But a lot of the rant that I'm about to do involves talking about the rape scenes featured in these books. Wayward, Sister Song, and The Furies all are books about women with magic, or trying to reconnect or connect initially with a magical side of themselves. They all have the exact same SA scene. To me, that SA scene is so shallow and underdeveloped, and it really feels like the author just needed something horrific to happen to the female character, so she made her get assaulted in the most shallow and unnecessary way. I don't know if these authors are drawing on their own experiences. I don't know if later on in the book the SA scene is more fleshed out and the reactions to it, tell a different story than what happens in the moment. But in all of these books, the female character meets a guy, like a chapter or 2, maybe a little bit more. He's charismatic, but obviously the bad guy, like obviously creepy. And then he gets the girl drunk, takes her out to the forest, a secluded part of the forest, and rapes her. And it is described in almost the exact same way. I understand that the author is trying to explain dissociation, because while it's happening, the girl is like, I don't understand what's going on, which just makes it a bit more icky because it makes the girl feel a lot younger than she is. Dissociation during acts like these are common. So I understand that the author is just trying to explain that phenomenon, but then it's really icky. And the reason I find this shallow is because, in my opinion, the author does not flesh out the scene itself and does not flesh out the other person within this act. These are all supposed to be feminist stories, but the author does not take time to explore patriarchal dynamics or why a man would take this moment to harm this person. There's no excuse, there's no justifiable reason, but there is a reason in the attacker's mind on why they are allowed to do this in their mind. It's never allowed. I feel like if they had just developed the male character a bit more, the act would not feel as shallow and unnecessary. To me, it just feels like the author was not doing their due diligence in developing this traumatic moment. And instead, we're just using femininity or feminism as a shorthand for this traumatic event, as in feminism, man is enemy, and the worst thing a man can do is rape a woman. And so man is enemy means man must harm. So they are just kind of skipping over the development of this villainous character by making him harm the woman in the worst way possible, instead of actually developing them. I know I'm rambling. I know I'm repeating myself. I do think that because I enjoyed the Furies so much, that if I hadn't read the other two books beforehand and gotten really grossed out and upset by them, I think I could have finished the Furies. But because I had read those books, and those books had some other issues that made me DNF at that point, it just felt more like a trend that I was getting upset by. I don't want to waste my time with this kind of book that is claiming to be feminist but is not actually exploring feminist ideology or patriarchal power dynamics or anything of that sort. Again, there is nuance to this. Of course, I don't know if these authors are drawing on their own personal experiences. I hope that nobody has gone through that, but it just felt very shallow to me. And I'm going to talk later in the video about a different book that also has a very predatory and inappropriate relationship. And yet to me, that is not done shallowly. So like, there is like a balancing beam, and obviously the balancing beam is impacted by my own biases. So take it, my abridged rant, with a grain of salt. So the next one is Willa and Hesper, and I'm not going to talk a lot about this one because I only read 3 pages of it. So at the time that I picked Willa and Hesper from the TBR jar, I was in the middle of drafting that rant discussion about sexual assault in books. I was looking at Willa and Hesper and going like, I don't know if I really want to read this. I don't know, is it going to be boring? I've got so many other books to read. And I told myself, like, there's no real reason to justifiably DNF this at the very beginning, like not actually try and, read it, unless it starts with like an essay scene. So I sit down and I crack open the book, and guess what? It literally starts with an essay scene. I don't know if I'm prophetic, decided that was a sign, and I moved on. I also read some other reviews, and just based off of what other people are saying, I don't think I would have liked this book. And one of the first reviews I read mentions that the essay does not come back up. It just starts with that for no reason. Okay, so I started hitting a reading slump and I wanted to read some audiobooks. I started with Nettle and Bone. I recently read T. Kingfisher's The Sworn Soldier series, and I really, really enjoyed them. But Nettle and Bone is a standalone that a lot of people recommend as like the first one you should try. The main character, Mara, is a girl that should not be the hero, but she decides to be the hero to rescue her sister, who's in an abusive relationship. Very fun reversal of fairy tale tropes. They get like a 5-man band together, and there's like a fairy godmother who isn't really great at giving blessings, but seems to be really adept at giving curses, and that's something she does not want to do. And it gave you that classic fairy tale idea. Also really good to note is that Mara is 30 when she goes on this adventure, so if you're looking to grow out of the YA/newly 18 main characters, Nettle and Bone features, a full adult, and it was a fun little romp around adventure fairy tale story. There are a couple things I wanted to mention, mainly the timeline. This is just a bit weird. It's not bad. I don't think that it hinders the book in any way. It's just a weird choice, and I want to talk about that. The book starts with her trying to complete the second task. So before she starts her like real journey, she's given 3 impossible tasks to complete. She has to like do that in order to get the information that the Dust Witch is going to give her to start her journey. So she starts the book in the middle of the second task. And in the first part of the book, it's like flashbacks to when she was a child and her sisters are getting married off to this prince, and then like flashing back to her completion of the second task. It hits a point where her mother sends her to a convent at 15, I think, and it just kind of goes from then to when she gets the tasks from the Dust Witch. So it explains her life in the convent, what she's learned, how she's learned it, how her life has changed, and then like finding out that her sister is in a very abusive relationship. And that takes like years to find out, from the time that she's 15 to the time that she's like 30 something. And she decides to take matters into her own hand and rescue her sister. So it's like flashing forward, really breakneck speed, just telling you about important events in all of these 15 years. The time that she like meets the Dust Witch and like gets these 3 impossible tasks, it flashes forward to the last task and then just starts the adventure. So the pacing of it was a bit weird. It's just a weird choice to start in the middle, do a couple flashbacks, get to a point where it just tells the story linearly, and then have the adventure in the last half of the book. Not a bad thing, just a weird choice. Then I read Feral Creatures. Feral Creatures is the second book of Hollow Kingdom. Hollow Kingdom is basically what the animals would do if the zombie apocalypse were to happen. So like the apocalypse is only affecting the humans, and the main character is this crow named Shit Turd who loves humans and hates animals and is trying to at first rescue the humans, and then he realizes all is lost, and so he just makes it his mission to rescue all of the domesticated animals that are trapped in like houses and stuff. I can't really talk about Feral Creatures without spoiling Hollow Kingdom, so spoilers ahead. At the end of Hollow Kingdom, he finds a baby in the Alaskan wilderness who is obviously untouched by this virus that affected humans. Feral Creatures starts with him like raising this baby, and then she's like old enough to walk and talk, and obviously she's raised by animals, so she's a bit different than like regular humans. She can like understand animal body language a lot better, and so she can basically speak to animals, but like not really speak to animals. Basically feel like this was an unnecessary sequel. I think there was a lot less going on in this book. Like it really doesn't have a lot of status quo changes. They're still in an apocalypse. There's just a human here. It's 2 hours longer than the first book. Less is going on, and so I would zone out for minutes at a time, and I'd zone back in, and Shit Turd is still talking about the same fucking thing because it's just so overwritten. And in my humble recommendation, I say if you liked Hollow Kingdom, just finish at Hollow Kingdom. I know it kind of ends on a cliffhanger, but I feel like it's a cliffhanger of hope. He's found a child, and like there is hope in the world, and you can kind of just leave it at that and not read the second book. The Ophelia Girls by Jane Healey. I did the thing that you're not supposed to do, where you read reviews before actually reading the book, and a lot of the reviews were just kind of like very upset that it was inappropriate, like there was inappropriate relationships, and I felt the opposite. I thought it was a very well-paced, intense read, so I didn't feel like it was slow in any way. Not to contradict my entire rant, but I feel like this is an example of when inappropriate sexual conduct is used in a fleshed out and developed way. The Ophelia Girls is split into 2 perspectives. The first one being Ruth. In the 70s, when she was a teenage girl, she and like 4 other girls would put on fun outfits, go out to the river, and take Polaroid pictures of themselves pretending to drown. So they were pretending to be the tragic heroines of pre-Raphaelite paintings, such as the famous Ophelia painting. There's also other drowning figures that they pretended to be, and they took these Polaroids, and tragic yet intense memory that she has because something traumatic happened at the end of that summer. She still has this deep love of seeing these girls express themselves through photography, through being and embodying these tragic heroines, because they were in and of themselves drowning in their own lives in their own different ways. And it's beautiful. It's this beautiful, tragic, artistic memory that she has. And then the present day, well, present at the time, the present perspective is of her teenage daughter, Maeve, who has just beat cancer. She's finally gone into remission. This is the summer they're back at her mother's family house, back at the same house that the traumatic incident happened. Ruth's childhood friends, Stuart is living with them in the guest house. And Maeve and Stuart start seeing each other. He was a friend of her mother's and her father's in college. Like, he went to college with them. So that age gap, that like almost 20-year age gap. And Maeve is 17. So things are happening. The way the relationship develops is Stuart is a photographer and he wants to recreate these pre-Raphaelite paintings, the Ophelia paintings, in modern settings. So with modern people, modern clothing. The whole idea of the book is that it is dissecting the differences between the straight male gaze and the queer female gaze, which to me was amazingly well done. You might disagree with the author, but the author is taking the stance that the straight male gaze is predatory and is using Stuart's inappropriate relationship with the 17-year-old to exemplify that, which is why I feel like even though there's inappropriate and sexual conduct, it is being developed and supporting this narrative thesis and actually developing Stuart as a character and juxtaposing it with this queer female gaze that Ruth has as she understands the feelings she was having for her friends while taking these Polaroid pictures. In my opinion, they are showcasing how the male gaze is consuming beauty, and obviously a lot of gross men think that beauty stops before you're 18, and so he is consuming this youthful beauty. That was a bit of a spoilery content, but I did want to show the difference between a shallow use of men being predatory against women and harming them versus a developed use of that. The next one is a big disappointment for me. Bestiary by K-Ming Chang. I really tried with this book. Again, magical realism and poetic writing are things that appeal to me. And I don't even mind grotesque writing. Obviously it has to, have a reason, but I do have a limit. And this book really exceeded my limit and, in my opinion, did not have a reason to be that grotesque. I understand you're trying to explain poverty, you're trying to explain the animalistic behaviors that these people have, you're trying to paint this picture, but it really is just pissing and shitting. Just every page is just pissing and shitting. Why? Why are we doing this? Why are we not having actual substance? Like, if it was just that, but the story itself was better, I think I would have completed it. There were just a lot of nonsensical sequences of events that I could not wrap my head around. And that is kind of what magical realism is, because it's magical, is set in the real world. So there's going to be weird things that are going on. Some of them might be more metaphorical. Some of them might really not connect with the story. If it's just one event after another that don't connect at all and are just kind of weird, I need to be done. For example, my breaking point was when an aunt comes to visit and she gives birth to a goose. I accidentally bought a book from Dollar Tree where I did not look too closely at it, and I found out that it was actually the third book of a series. Thankfully, Libby has the first two books on audio, so I listened to them. This is the Elemental series by Amie Kaufman. I really liked the first book, Ice Wolves. I listened to it on audio. It's a middle grade book, so it's going to be a bit more childish or simplistic. In this world, there are humans and then things called elementals, which are animal shifters. The animal shifters of this country are dragons and wolves. The shifting ability is hereditary, but not everyone gets that gene. You could be the direct descendant of a wolf shifter and not be able to shift yourself, or you could be, the descendant of an ancestral dragon, and one person in this family line thousands of years ago was a dragon, and then you got that gene. So the dragons and wolves are at odds. In the past, they have had tentative alliances. There was a great big war about 10 years ago, and they are just enemies. Anders, he is the twin brother of Reina. A series of events happens, and they end up touching the artifact, the magical item that forces a transformation and reveals your true nature. Reina turns into a dragon. Anders is what the hell? Oh, these are twin orphan street rats. They have no idea what their family's like. So Anders is oh my god, we are descendant of dragons. That's so terrifying. He touches the artifact and turns into a wolf. There is no possible way that our family has both dragon and wolf DNA. because that's illegal. That's wrong. We are mortal enemies. In the first book, Anders goes to the military wolf academy. He's doing this to learn more about the dragon so he can go rescue his sister. The best part of this book was the relationship. I think Anders and Rena had such a realistic sibling relationship. The way they bickered, the way they still had a fierce love for each other. There are so many times where there's a brother and sister character and they just do not feel natural, but these ones did. And then there were cute hints of other relationships, like close friendships / romantic relationships that I just really, really enjoyed. For example, some 2 side characters, Zacharias and Victoria, were very much the grumpy sunshine aspect. Loved that. And then like Anders and his closest friend, Lisabeth, were the cute little like rebel relationship that I'm always looking for. Loved it. And the second book basically is Anders goes to rescue his sister in the dragon territory and they get stuck there. And so it's a whole new set of characters who are also cool. You realize that like Lisabeth is starting to take a back seat and his relationship with Rena is getting less nuanced and more like everything's all right and we're both the greatest characters ever. Then the third book was definitely a book. Main part of the story that I loved was the relationship aspect of it, like the nuanced and complicated relationships that I really liked and wanted to see explored. But they were not. All of the characters except Anders take a backseat and don't really do much. The third book is really a hurry up and wait book where there's a lot of stuff going on and everyone's preparing for an attack and everyone's getting mad and there's rising tension, but then they're just like sitting down and talking and the stakes aren't really high. Big spoiler, but there is major character death in the third book and it like does not impact the story at all or me as the reader. So the third book was a big disappointment. I understand the thesis that the author is going for. Prejudice could just be talked through when we put our differences aside. Totally understand that. Great moral for a kid's book. But the story aspect of the book just really fell to the wayside. And lastly, I listened to Rough Magic by Lara Pryor Palmer. Rough Magic is a memoir as she details her experience riding in the Mongol Derby. I did not know about the Mongol Derby until like a week ago when I read this book. The Mongol Derby is the world's longest and toughest endurance ride, 1,000 kilometers in the Mongolian steppe, which is a very tough terrain, and you are riding specifically, not your own horse, but the half-wild Mongolian ponies that are basically volunteered by the local herders and families that are working with the program people. Lara herself learned about the Mongol Derby and on a whim just applied. She actually applied really late, so she didn't have a lot of horse experience herself, but then also didn't have a lot of time to prepare her body, her mind, her like research on what she needs to get done. She herself was never an endurance rider, so she just kind of like enters this with very little preparation and then ends up winning, which is so cool. And the way she explains her experience was so fun. And this book was actually really dangerous because I started looking up the entry fees, and thank God they're like $15,000, because if they were something attainable like $1,500, I might enter. But unfortunately, they are thousands of dollars, which means that I'm not going to be doing this, which is probably a good thing. I couldn't stop thinking about it, so I forced my fiance to watch the documentary with me, which was even cooler because you're actually getting to see them ride and like, so I'm not going to do this, but the book made me feel like so inspired and made me want to like do something like that, and I really liked it. Anyway, Lara Pryor Palmer is now my hero. I love her. Those were all of the important books that I read in September and October. I'm still trying to complete my TBR mystery jar list thing that I'm doing, but I'm also reading some audiobooks when I have the time and when I need to just kind of like take a break from physical books. That balance has been kind of helping me sustain this challenge that I've given to myself. Other than that, happy Halloween. Hopefully this will be out by Halloween, or if not, probably November. Have you read any of these books? If you have, what were your thoughts on them? I will put in my like caption if this was a Dollar Tree book or not. So I'm still doing Dollar Tree book reviews. Anyway, that's going to be it from me. Have a wonderful day and bye. You need to do something?
Yeah, I was going to make lunch.
Oh, okay.
Drink any of this?
Drink any of what?
The monk rum?
Oh, yeah. It's in here.
Was it good?
No.
Why?
Because I thought it'd be fun.
Oh.
It's my day off.
That kid.
It's almost Halloween.